Welcome to Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we discuss Trump 2.0's policies and politics and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. We've all been wondering, how bad is China's economy, really? Is the property market on the verge of collapse? Is it all just robotics and high-tech factories now? Answering these questions isn't simple, but we're giving it a shot with our guest Kelvin Lam. He's a macroeconomist based in London who has been watching China for a long time. We'll talk about the story behind China's property market, why it's a huge part of the country's growth, and the government's plans to boost spending at home. Plus, we'll get into how China is handling issues like overcapacity and what's next in their 15th five-year plan, which will be discussed later in October. Let's hear Kelvin's perspective. Welcome, Kelvin. It's really nice to have you on our program. First of all, can you introduce yourself? What's your career so far?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. I'm Kelvin. Started off my economics career in the UK back in 2007. So I was doing UK economics back then in the City of London, banks and consultancies. Before moving back to Hong Kong in 2015, in Hong Kong, I was working for a couple of investment banks covering Asia and also China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. I was basically doing research work for a few years in Hong Kong, and then I'm back in London now in 2022. I've been doing macroeconomic research for almost 15, 20 years and really enjoyed it.
What is going on with China's economy?
What is interesting for China at the moment, or most talkative thing, is the economic slowdown. But the Chinese growth rate is still, around 5%. We also look into the high frequency data to see if the 5% official growth rate is genuine. High frequency data that we see also pointed to something similar, a bit lower than 5%, but not too much. So that means that the growth rates that China has been running at the moment is actually way above what developed markets is facing still. But there are several things occurring in China that is worth noting. For example, property sector is at the core of the entire problem because the property sector used to be around 25 to 30% of the economy. It also accounts for a certain level of household wealth, and the collapse of the property sector in recent years means that it is affecting households. Spending, consumption, that goes with it as well. Now, at the moment, the Chinese property sector is suffering from over supply of inventories in general. The Chinese property sector is divided into different tiers, first tier cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and you've got second tier and third tier cities as well. The problem of inventory issues is focused and concentrated in lower tier cities, the cities where they overbuilt and no one wants to buy. So you've got that polarization in the property sector where you see first tier cities going relatively well, I would say not really well, and at the same time you see property prices still tanking quite seriously in the second and the third tier cities. Some stronger second tier cities are performing quite well, but the overall direction in the last few months is that all three tier cities are slowing, partly because the stimulus that the Chinese authorities imposed back in September last year is wearing out, and also because of the fact that there's less demand for properties generally, because people are beset by two things: the external trade uncertainty from the trade war, and also because of internal issues that China has. For example, the job sector, the job security isn't that strong because industries are slowing, and at the same time, quite a lot of confidence issues regarding developers. China, the property purchases relates to resale system. So people put down their deposits and they expect a delivery of the property afterwards. And the property developers will use that fund to go to built the property, home buyers prepaid the property to buy it. But then that kind of trust is broken because of recent issues with a lot of property developers going bankrupt, and no one wants to put their money in it and risk their money. The government is doing a lot to mend that, giving funding for developers to complete the jobs that they are still pending to complete the property and get them delivered to homeowners. But I guess that, the confidence issue is still quite weak at the moment. We're not out of the woods for sure, but there are some positivity in the property sector. For example, the inventory levels is now fallen to a level that is more acceptable. I wouldn't say it's going back to what you would generate any demand-driven price gains, but it is constantly falling throughout the last year or so. And our expectation is that the inventory levels will fall to a point where it will start turning the property market around slightly, at least for the tier one and tier two cities, very very soon in the fourth quarter or maybe Q1 next year. Then you will start to see prices starting to stabilize a little bit for the property sector. And because the property sector is getting better, the households will have the financial comforts and the confidence to buy properties and also spend on big ticket items. And the economy hopefully will start to get injection from this optimism, and therefore will kickstart the slow recovery that we're expecting. Another major thing is, I think, asset investments, because at the moment it's being weighed down by the poor property sector performance. Housing start is still very, very weak, and no one wants to invest in the property yet. And when that started to turn, you will see the FAI coming back online, and therefore propelling Chinese economic recovery slightly better from then.
You're looking at some kind of sign of recovery is early next year?
I think I would say so, yeah. I would say that the Chinese property market, I mean, at the moment, you can still see the tier one and tier two cities, stronger ones, to see some sort of price gains month on month from time to time. So definitely there are already signs that parts of the sectors, because China is so big, are stabilizing, right? So you will expect a more widespread stabilization, hopefully in early parts of next year, when the inventory levels fallen to a point where it is starting to put a floor on property prices. So that's what we're expecting at the moment.
For people to understand China's economy, they have to understand a big part of it is driven by real estate, because that's very much tied to people's confidence as well as how comfortable they feel about their future income, since so much is generated through real estate investment,
Yes, and
right?
that's correct, yeah. And I think that leads to the problem when the property sector started to turn again. Is it going back to what it was before? It is in, I think, the authorities' interests, or thinking that the property sector should not go back to what it was before, because
Because it was a bubble.
it
Yeah.
was more or less, yeah, and too much resources been put in it, and that misallocation of resources have led to huge debts borne by the property companies, and also affect the financing for local governments. I think that needs to be completely revamped. And what fills the
Yeah.
gap is interesting, because what else is there? A new engine of growth. A lot of people would say high tech sector is going to do it. Yes, I mean the high tech sector is developed to a point where is responsible for certain amounts of industrial production, but is it strong enough to fill the gap that's been left open by the property sector, which used to cover 25 to 30% of the economy? Now people said there's around 17, 18%. The most logical way of any developing economies to think about is to enlarge domestic demand, which a lot of people have been talking about. That means increasing consumption, because if you look into developed economies like the UK, the US, consumption accounts for a lot of growth, like 60-70% growth. Service sector account for about 80-90% of the economy, whereas manufacturing accounts for much less. And also, they aren't really investment-driven growth economy like China used to be before, partly because of different stages of development, but also this is what China wanting to go to when they develop their economy. So it would be a long and protracted process for China to do that. And there are several ways of doing it. First, when you look into spending, there are still quite a lot of people living in rural areas in China. and the hukou system and the migrant system is inhibiting people to unleash their savings into buying their goods. At one point in 2017 and 18, me and my ex-boss looking into Chinese savings stock. We were shocked to find out that actually a lot of money has been stored in individuals' pockets and bank accounts, most notably in Canton area, Guangzhou areas. When these money are being unleashed into the economy, they represent a strong thrust of consumption growth, driven growth that can be that can be sustained for a while.
Let's just go back to domestic consumption. As you said, it sounds like China is also encouraging reindustrialization in a way that's similar to the US. If I recall, the China pre-COVID, as you said, most of the growth came from real estate related as well as a lot of consumer facing technology. So we saw a boom in consumer facing tech, and some were bubbles burst intentionally by the government policies, but some just seemed to take a hit during COVID and they never quite recovered. Does the government want to see China's economy moving to a different phase, which means manufacturing based or high tech driven, AI driven kind of economy? Do you feel like that's a deliberate policy? And how will that help employment or build consumer confidence so China becomes a more domestic consumption based economy?
Yes, I think it's China's deliberate attempt to boost is high tech manufacturing. I think if you go back to 2015, when China unveiled its flagship policy of Made in China 2025, they want to move up the industrial value chain to produce higher value products. I think if you recall in the past, where after China joined WTO back in 2001 and two, they were the world's factory for low value added goods like plastic shoes, garments, OEM products, something that is a low value add because it has the population or the demographic dividend to spend that they can use that because it's a low cost production base. But when the demographic dividend ends in late 2010s, China needs to find a way out because there are bottlenecks in the economy. So it is China's deliberate attempt to go into high-tech manufacturing to generate enough value add for per unit of products so that it maintains or at least keep the productivity from growing the economy, because otherwise it will be stuck in a middle income trap that a lot of people were worrying about.
We see that the unemployment rate, especially among the fresh graduates, has been stubbornly high. And moving up the value chain feels like it'll benefit the high skilled workers
Mhm.
rather than where do all the
Yes.
factory workers go?
Yeah, I think there are two uh, answers for that. First, I think for the high tech jobs that they are generating at the moment, those people who are lucky to get it will obviously get the benefits from higher pay, etc. Therefore, supporting consumption that way. But at the same time, because the working population is declining, it's basically the government's job to manage that decline carefully. And it's always the case that the government's policy is running behind the curve in that. So you will see unemployment being fluctuating from time to time, even though we don't have a very official data on what actually unemployment rate.
What is your estimate? I've seen numbers around 20 among college graduates,
Yeah,
right?
I think the official number after the adjustments in the definition, removing students who are still studying and looking for work, for example, to reduce the numbers, is around 25, 26%, around those marks. We don't have an estimate for the general unemployment rate for the entire nation, but being constant at 5%, 5.1% is a fairly rough assumption of what the general situation is.
You mean the 5% is the general unemployment rate?
Yes, the 5% one is being published by the NBS. I think the calculation for unemployment is slightly different to the UK. The Chinese, I have to double check, but I think that you have to looking for jobs
Yeah.
for 6 months before it appears on the statistics. So that's why it's been more stable compared to the more volatile Western figures. The second idea of for where are all those manufacturing laid off laborers go to after the upgrading, because there's less labor needed for those automated industry for a start, and all those robotics that comes to play. I think that services sector is the answer, because a lot of people forget that services industry is actually quite labor intensive. For example, people working in shops as a shopkeepers or as a salesman in auto shops, they are labor intensive.
Wouldn't they be replaced by robotics in the future too?
They will be. I think it's a general problem for a lot of nations. I mean, if you go to China, particularly, I think it's a step ahead. Even for Korea, you can see automated robots handing out meals to clients in restaurants. But I think the society will evolve to a point where people value crafts and human contact as a premium service going forwards, and therefore generate more value add from going to restaurants that are served by, say, human rather than robots. You probably would see a lot of robots in low value add restaurants like restaurant chains, McDonald's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that. So let's come back to talk about domestic consumption, because I also want to tie it to the US China talk. US Treasury Secretary Bessent, he also said they pressed China on increasing domestic consumption. What are the policies in China that are in place to boost that domestic consumption? You know, we've heard over the last couple months there were coupons given out, there are rebates. Are they working, and are things getting better?
As you said, the consumption coupons giving out by the local government level for people to spend while the government sponsoring some of it, of the spending, and also the trade-in scheme generally rolled out nationally for white goods. So that people can replace their home appliances with better quality and environmental standard wise better quality white goods. And also there are trade-in schemes for cars as well. These are the general major direct consumption policies that China is implementing. But whether it is really boosting it, it has, when you look into the retail sales data, there are pockets of strength in those areas that are supported by the government. However, those that are not being supported are still quite soft in terms of growth. In those retail sales. What the Chinese government has been doing is to basically keep growth at around 5% in this downturn, so that it keeps the economy ticking, jobs not falling apart. I mean, jobs market not falling apart, and wait until the property sector turns around. And when that major drivers, even though it's less now, turns around, it will help with the rest of the consumption, because all the problems that we have seen before is no longer a major problem afterwards. For example, the cash flow problem that the property companies are facing, and if the people start buying properties, that will no longer a major problem. And most importantly, for Chinese policies to boost consumption is income growth. Without income growth, the actual consumption growth rate will stagnate. So I think that if you look into the Chinese policy statements in the last year or so, they always says that the rural area income growth need to be boosted. Some common prosperities drive in the rural area or people with disability, and most importantly is the sort of deregulations or implementations of better social policies. If China has got a better social safety nets, people don't have to save up for the rainy days, and we unleash that part of spending so that they don't get saved excessively in the bank accounts, and therefore they recycle back into the economy by spending on goods and items. And hopefully that will make the economy more balanced, and therefore pushing China towards a more consumption driven growth.
That's interesting. So China's policy still looks like it is helping the bottom to move up, their bet is that these will be the people who will consume more and therefore help the economy. It seems that over the last few years, those who are losing jobs tend to be, or I should say, due to my limited interaction with China, seems to be many of those people who are white collar workers in tier one, tier two cities.
Generally speaking, the situation in tier one and tier two cities is that the reason why they want to boost the real income growth in rural areas because first, I think it was Chinese authorities' initiative to start letting part of the country getting wealthy fast. So those are the coastal tier one cities, people who live there, who enjoyed most of the economic benefits from economic developments. But the Chinese authority wanted that to filter through to the less benefited ones, which basically are the rural area people who are still not yet being urbanized or decided not to leave the rural areas because of certain reasons. And also partly because of the fact that they want to reduce the inequality of wealth between the two parts of the country to maintain social stability. Imagine people in Shanghai already got 3K OLED TVs in their house already. The likelihood for them to buy an extra TV is much less than people who only got one set of 4K TV at home in the rural areas. So the propensity or the willingness for those rural residents to spend in that sort of settings is a lot higher.
I went to China last year and met with government officials, and they urged me to visit rural areas because that's the part they're most proud of in terms of China's improvement of livelihood. They were saying how during COVID, that's where the government spent most of their energy and resources on is lifting up the rural areas living standards. And so that's consistent with the messaging that's coming out of the government that they're trying to make sure there's less inequality, which also is quite interesting in contrast to the current economic policy adopted by the Trump administration, which is betting on growth rather than closing the inequality gap. We do see a lot of policy actions from China. So the AI action plan is an example. We are seeing China leading in many of the advanced technology fields. Do you think that is, a way for the government to hopefully drive growth? How is that going to benefit more people in terms of employment, and how is that going to help the overall economy grow?
I used to be a UK economist, right? So if I use a developed market lens to look into China, I will raise exactly the same question as you because how is it going to drive growth? I mean, it's not going to benefit the country as much as people would expect because those are a niche sector of the economy which is not going to have a trickle down effect for the rest of the nation like low value add manufacturing did before and the drive from services sector to take up the slack in the labor market probably wouldn't be as fast as you would expect, and that would result in a very big unemployment. But that aside, I think it's important to understand one reason why they're going that direction. Olivia Chang, one of my friends who wrote a very good book about Xi Jinping political economic thoughts, she mentioned the three reasons for the priorities for Xi Jinping to run the country. And one of them is to get economically stronger. And by doing that, and that means putting the country's resources behind acquiring those top notch, hard to get technology so that China weans itself off from away from Western technology settings
So that is, we're talking about reducing the reliance
on
on.
Western, and
Yeah,
that is key
yeah.
because they will do whatever it takes to do that. And growth is secondary in that sense that if you get enough economic growth, then you can command a bigger say in terms of setting the world stage rules. Um, and that's one of the reasons why it opens up the market, the CCP, the opening up policy to get economically stronger. Of course, the rhetoric of letting people get wealthier, people live better is important. But ultimately, their thinking is that If they can become self-reliant on technology, if they can run ahead of the West in terms of that, they will command a better power in terms of this shifting geopolitics at the moment, where they can have a better say in how the world is run.
That in particular, that type of policy is more external, right? Less about domestic, taking care of the people or domestic economy. Is
Um,
that
I,
right?
w- I would say that the reason why they want to develop high tech sector isn't purely about getting a better life for the general population in China. It's about running ahead of the game, having a better say in terms of international power, international rules.
And probably have less vulnerability as well. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's about national security. Is about
Yeah, that's
national.
more about national security.
Yeah.
Yeah, we already seeing that, they're using rare earth and they've been very effective. You are seeing some over competition or over capacity. EV is one example. It just seems that because of government encouragement, there's overcrowded industrial competition in that area. What is the right way of looking at what is happening over there?
Chinese excessive competition, or they call it involution, is quite an interesting thing actually, because the word actually first borrowed from anthropology, where self-perpetuating processes that keep the agrarian societies from progressing is now used in a social, individual, and the business context. The word is now being used to describe self-defeating cycle of intense competition amongst businesses in the economy that is seeing diminishing returns. Involution is relatively unhealthy because it means cutthroat competition, draining company resources. So companies are not only competing on prices only, but also the financial strength rather than the innovation and the quality of the product that they produce. And if that persists, it will make China's manufacturing less competitive in the longer run, because they spend all their resources in these kind of pointless, excessive price competition to drive everyone out of the markets, where they should have spent all their money or part of it in on R&D. In China's case, this kind of involution also damages the supply chain as well, because we're told that companies are delaying their payments to the suppliers so that they can fund this kind of pointless price competition. I think it's quite important for China's economic development at the moment, because we are at a juncture where China is struggling for industries to upgrade from a relatively low tech space to something that is more higher value added product that requires a lot more investments and R&D and innovation to boost the value add and productivity.
And what is the government doing on that front?
I think there are two sides of the solution they have done or trying to do, as a supply side and demand side. And the supply side, since the July the 1st meeting, CCFEA meeting about economics and finance, I think President Xi and Li Qiang already said the government's priority is to sort out these disorderly competition. And after that, there is a flurry of industry meetings and announcements from industry bodies and key firms reaffirming those need to tackle this problem. Also to remove the outdated capacity gradually as well. Consolidation of industries is important. So far, the way that they try to tackle it is to make the EV industries less competitors around, consolidate that to a few champions so that they can compete internationally and domestically in a healthy manner. But unfortunately, that is tied up to local government vested interests as well, because the local governments want to invest with their own EV champion that is based within their jurisdiction to generate growth and jobs. If they allow that to merge with your neighboring province EV, that would automatically mean a loss of economic outputs, which the local government officials' performances will be judged on. There's a lot of obstacles from doing that. The announcement of the intention to solve this problem in 1st of July meeting is that the government is willing to take a more top-down approach to solve this issue, because previously you can see in the last year or so, including the EV industries, they're more about self-regulations of the industry to eliminate this kind of over competition. But it is clearly not working as what the government wanted. Some sort of forced consolidation of industries are important. In terms of overcapacity, the problem now is that this time is different to previously. This time, I think in the past, in 2015-16, it's all about traditional industries overcapacity. There are more, cutting back on capacity in coal and steel industry back then, and the result is quite remarkable. Commodities prices start propping up again, and output prices start propping up as well as a result, because most of the players in those two traditional industries are SOEs, state-owned enterprise. But now the key involuted industries that we are talking about now, for example, EVs, solar panels, lithium batteries, etc., those are dominated by private companies, which is very hard for central government to gain control of in terms of their internal policies on how to not engage in those involution-styled competition.
But the growth of those companies, in large part, was due to local government policy benefits, right? So there's tax rebate subsidies that kind of prop up the EV industry as well, even though they're not really run by state-owned enterprises. So when those policies go away, can they still survive?
Um, those will be the decisions of the local governments. I guess when the
Mm-hmm.
top-down approach comes along, the local government will have to entertain it at some point. What happens is that it will take the central government a couple of goes before they can achieve what they wanted. But they will get there in the end, because China is, even though it says that it's a market-oriented economy, but actually is a very planned economy state still. So what the Chinese government ultimately wanted will, hopefully fed down to the local level, and force them to change the way that corporates behave, or merger and acquisitions between those companies eventually. So it is in the nation's interest to do that. So perhaps they'll be compensated with some sort of arrangement that they're willing to do so, and they're just basically waiting to work that out, and hopefully we'll have some kind of boost from that sort of policy space in the next couple of years.
Do you see the acknowledgement of overcapacity among Chinese leaders? Because it's been an issue from the West to China for a couple years now. They first denied there's overcapacity issue, but now it seems like they are acknowledging simply by some of the policies that are issued.
Yes, and back in the older days, when the traditional industries are suffering from overcapacity issues, the central, I mean, the government needs to acknowledge that before they can cut capacity. So it was acknowledged before. The reason why they're not doing it now is because probably they think it's not at that time the right time to do so. Maybe political agendas or some other things. But it is clear from economic statistics that a lot of the stuff that they export, the export price is being depressed because of overcapacity of their domestic industries. When the property sector is down, a lot of the materials that they want, or steel and other traditional stuff, are being exported elsewhere. Solar panels is another example where, apart from overcapacity because of lack of the less demand that they have, or involution induced supply in the domestic economy, they sometimes are deliberately lowering prices globally to drive out their competitors. So there are two things happening at the same time, apart from the involution related domestic side effects. Therefore, increased capacity, and therefore overcapacity, oversupply on certain goods. There are deliberate attempts to do that as well. Solar panel is a very good example on how a new industry in China can drive out innovation and market share of developed markets relatively quickly. They use the the economy of scales of China. The market is big with policy supports to install a lot of panels internally, green policies, etc., and drive down the costs of those companies. Subsidies, on the other hand, fueled the R&D in those solar panels and drive product innovation. The combination of that is a wipeout of worldwide solar panel industry. And now China is the leader in that industry. This is China's fundamental industrial policies to gain market share and to develop new market industries to become a champion for or a new engine for growth for China. And the same is applying to the EV industry. China's cars are cheap and relatively good quality, partly because the economy scales domestically, lowering the cost internally, and also having more resources to invest in R&D to design a product that people want. That is the reason why EV industries for China is becoming more successful relative to some Western companies as a result, and also getting the right direction immediately in terms of response. Company response to international trend and domestic policies are important. The Chinese are doing relatively quickly because it is partly government directed policies.
There's going to be a 15th 5-year plan coming up soon, later in October. Is that right?
Yeah, so actually, the Politburo statements that we saw earlier, there was an expectation for the Politburo to outline the broad contours of anti-involution policies, but obviously that didn't come through between 2021 and 20. Things like juice circulation, push towards it, tax self-sufficiency, green economy, urban and rural integration, and aging population, addressing the problems associated with that, were the core focus for the 14 5-year plan. This 15 5-year plan is going to be first a continuation of previous, economic policies and focus more directly on, I think, on national security like food and technology. Because given the tectonic shift in recent geopolitics and geoeconomics in recent years, self-sufficiency is important. And if there's instability in the region, how can China cope with that? Would be in the mind of Chinese policymakers. And I think that the transition to become a consumption-driven economy will be more explicitly stated in the five, maybe more social policy reforms regarding child support, which we saw already recently. Maybe something about pension reform, hukou reform that release some of the funds trapped in household savings accounts and spend them on domestically produced goods. And also, I think there will be more common prosperity push. Income redistribution. That's what they want. Education as well, streamlining the policy, and maybe more taxation on assets and wealth as a result. You never know.
Fascinating. Well, I think there's a lot to watch out for. But in the meantime, the negotiations between US and China is also highly watched by many observers around the world. That is the part we, didn't really discuss today because I really wanted people to pay more attention to what
Hmm.
China does domestically. I think oftentimes international observers tend to analyze China's behavior as if it's doing so in order to respond to, the US or other government's policy. But when in reality, so much consideration is domestically focused. Thank you so much, Kelvin, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll have you back maybe after the newest 5-year plan. I'm very curious how China is going to lead the country the next 5 years. So thank you.
Thanks for having
All
me.
right. Foreign policy is often seen as the primary driver of China's behavior and decisions. However, my conversation with Kelvin highlighted that domestic considerations are at the core of most of China's economic policies. While national and economic security are significant factors, especially given current geopolitical tensions and China's goal of achieving self-reliance, the main drivers of China's economic policy are to boost domestic consumption, avoid the middle income trap, and upgrade manufacturing. According to Kelvin, the upcoming 15th five-year plan will likely to be a continuation of the current plan's policies. This is Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we analyze the policies and political strategies of Trump 2.0 and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. Thank you for watching and listening. We value your feedback. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and podcast. See you next time.